Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. In today's episode, we will be discussing on the transitional justice system and the needs of conflict victim in Nepal. Joining us today is Mr. Kumar Bhandari, President of the National Network of the Families of the Disappeared and Missing. Please allow me to welcome him. Welcome to the show, Mr. Bhandari.
Thank you, Laxman.
How have you been?
I'm good.
Well, it's already been a decade that the 10-year long conflict ended with peace negotiations. How do you observe from the conflict victim side the overall transitional justice system of Nepal?
After 10 years of armed conflict and big suffering for many families, and then we hope that the comprehensive peace agreement will and address those families' issues, and the process will listen victims and solve all problems that families have suffered during the conflict. But when we see the past 10 years of the peace process, from the victims' perspective, this has been failed because the government and the major political parties, they failed to address those issues, and also they have failed to deliver the outputs that they committed during the peace agreement. So from that perspective, if you see from finding truth, providing justice to the thousands of families, and also designing the reparation policies for the victim support, the government and political parties missed the opportunities, and victims of those conflicts still suffer today.
What were the major lapses addressing the concerns and needs of conflict victims?
The main thing is we don't see the strong political will, and also there is no policy at all, only the superficial commitment adopted at the top level by the politicians that could not help the families. Many families in the countryside, majority victims, they were from the very poor background, marginalized communities, and so they have suffered through the conflict, and they had no access to the political parties, very little access to the government mechanism and the government system, and so they could not receive those support that they were seeking from the government, so they failed to deliver that. And the political parties and the government, the government agencies, they also failed to consult with the victims.
Well, Mr. Bhandari, I will come back to you on the role of political parties and the government. You belong to the families of the victim as well, and you have been working to provide justice to the families of victim through different platforms. Could you tell us the situation of the members of the victims?
The members of the victims, that I already mentioned, that the majority victims from the rural areas, from very poor background, and if you see the root causes of the Nepal's conflict, it lies on the poverty, structural violence. Both the structure, political institution and the security institution, the then Royal Nepal Army, Nepal Police, and the Maoist People's Liberation Army, they have violated the people's rights, and the exclusion, and then most of the groups and the people in the ground, they have been marginalized by the state polity. Those were the major causes. And after the comprehensive peace agreement, the CPA has envisioned some transformative agenda. The state and the major political parties, and they have hijacked all the process at the top level without consultation and without representation of those victims in the process. Both in the peace process and the transitional justice process. So this process and the later system could not achieve the goal and could not address the victims' agenda. Mainly the victims in their everyday life and also in their livelihood, sustainability, they could not get anything from the government mechanism. So if you see from that point of view, so there are no achievement, and I see the more challenges. The challenges from the state mechanism at the political level, and then if you see the role of various actors, the role of politics, role of parliament, role of National Human Rights Commission, and role of the various actors, human rights groups, international agencies. Also, they need to review that, what went wrong. So, still, where victims stand today is if you go and see the common victims in the villages and district
Do you
level.
mean that the overall state mechanism, including that of the government and the political parties, their vision has been failed in addressing the needs or concerns of victims,
Right.
that of the 10 years long conflict?
Right, from the conflict victims perspective.
What can be done so that the issues are readdressed and the appropriate reparation is provided to the victims?
If you see the government official narratives, and then they claim that the peace process has been successfully concluded. Comprehensive peace agreement actually, it has envisioned 3 major goals. It has been set by the political parties. They have committed so many points agreements in the post-conflict situation, and then they were negotiating to draft a new constitution. They have done, within some problems and challenges that we have seen that many communities and groups, even political parties, they are not satisfied, and there are so many disappointments, and many people sacrificed during the constitution drafting process and the promulgation of new constitution. And also another objective was to integrate the former combatants into national army and then to support them. And also in that process also many combatants, and youth combatants, they still suffer, and there are so many stigmas, social, political, cultural, and the everyday stigma that they face still today. And the integration process could not cover all the issues and all the members of the ex-combatant. And in the third, the conflict victims issues, the mechanism could not address. In the comprehensive peace agreement and following with the interim constitution and the later agreements, the political parties and the government, they have committed jointly to address through the transitional justice mechanism, through providing interim relief to the conflict victims, and also providing justice to them, and also framing a reparation policies, and then let them participate in the peace process. So I think from the victims communities, as a representative of the conflict victims community, I would say that this process, government system, could not address our issues in terms of
Mr.
needs.
Bhandari, how do you analyze the performance of transitional justice mechanisms, including that of the TRC and Commission of Investigation on the Enforced Disappeared Persons?
Right. There is a long history of the commission process. During the conflict, when we lost our members, family members, our relatives, and then we were the group during the conflict also that we demanded the then government to release our members and also to provide truth and justice to the suffering families during the conflict also. After the peace agreement, and we had a great hope that the newly formed system and the changed political situation will address our issues. And then we are hopeful. But later, the different government during the 10 years post-conflict situation, we have experienced 9 governments. And all the governments, we see that they are not serious to addressing these issues, especially addressing the conflict victims' needs, supporting their livelihood, and also supporting and creating the suitable transitional justice environment. Still today, we don't see the very conducive environment where victims can freely speak out, victims can freely go and register their
Mr.
compliance.
Bhandari, there was some attempts, some initiatives by the government establishing these tools,
Right.
these instruments, these commissions.
Right.
And what is missing along with the works of these commissions?
Yeah, I was coming to your point that when government formed commission, and there were some flaws in the act draft. We had so many disappointment in the process. Government, they didn't listen our voices and our key demands to find truth, justice, and reparation. And a government did not consult with the conflict victims and their representative associations and network. And then they drafted a Transitional Justice Act in Kathmandu, and with the limited consultation So there was no wider consultation. They didn't ask and openly consult with the conflict victims, actually what justice means for them, and then how they can deliver outputs to the victims. So they missed that opportunity. And then when they drafted a Transitional Justice Act, and there were, very serious flaws that to the Disappear Commission, we still don't have the disappearance law in Nepal. So there are legal flaws, and so there are no clear provisions to criminalize enforced disappearance as a crime against humanity. This is our great concern. And also in the other provision, they have put some tactically to go for the blanket amnesty. And then we had a serious serious reservation on that.
Do you mean that not having consultation with the families of victims, that mean that political parties or the government agencies,
authorities run by the politics,
they are in favor of providing with the blanket amnesty,
right,
and finally fueling the culture of impunity,
right?
How can this be addressed?
There are no laws. We are still demanding and advocating to amend the current act, and so they have to change the current course in terms of law, and also they have to change their political attitude and to advance the political will to support the mechanism. These are the major issues and challenges that we see. And then they formed this mechanism, but government the government has not provided adequate resources and the technical expertise. Commission lack those elements in their process. And also we don't see this transitional justice mechanism as a system. This is a process. So that's why we are advocating and all the time demanding for ensuring victims' participation, their representation, and so that we can take an ownership. And now there are problems that problems and question on the ownership issues, question of representation, question of participation. So ultimately, there are some problems and challenges on the credible commission.
What should be the role of the constitutional bodies like National Human Rights Commission and the United Nations?
So the National Human Rights Commission is a constitutional body, and then in the Transitional Justice Act they have a role of monitoring, and then they can monitor the commission. But in the past 2 years we could not see their close monitoring to the commission, and also the international agencies, I think they have missed some opportunities due to the flaws in the act, and the international community including UN, they have no position. And so they said that I will wait and see. To the victims, all the victims, majority victims, they want immediate justice, relief and support on their everyday life, to run their everyday life. And so there were serious problems in between international community and the victims, in between human rights groups and the victims. And so that's why we adopted our critical engagement position. And so we have been critically engaging with the commission process. So that's why the result was, and we have succeeded to register all compliance, 100% compliance in the commission. Now there are around, in the both commission, 61,000 compliance have been registered, and 3,000 in the Disappear Commission, and 58,000 plus violations registered in the TRC, Truth and Reconciliation Commission. This means for the first time after 10 years of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, all the victims, and then we have registered our compliance in the commission, which is official record, and we see this as a achievement.
What is the status of the investigation on those cases?
I think commissions are lost within themselves due to their internal problem, due to lack of the resources, and due to lack of their clear roadmap that where they go, where they stand, and the commissions expertise and the lack of knowledge to deal with those cases. I think they are lost somewhere. So they need expertise, they need clear laws. So amendment process is ongoing, and we are highly demanding to immediately amend the Transitional Justice Act to the government. So, and we have been also lobbying through the National Human Rights Commission and the civil society organization and also international agencies. Let's create a strong pressure jointly to the government to amend it.
What are the major amendments that you seek or the members of your community seek within the TRC?
The first one is the disappearance should be criminalized, and then we should draft a disappearance law, and that's it. This is more important for the disappeared communities and for the disappeared commission and for the TRC.
Do you see any possibility from the government side that issues concerning disappearance be criminalized in Nepal?
Yes, I see the possibilities, and also Nepal is a state party of the United Nations, and there are some international norms and some guidelines by the United Nations General Secretaries, guidelines on transitional justice, and they have to follow that principles, norms of transitional justice. That is one reason. And also Nepal is a party of a different international convention and on human rights and it other conventions. So they have to follow that norms. And also we have our national standards also in 2007, and we have also filed the cases against the disappearances to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court made a very clear verdict and directed government of Nepal to criminalize the enforced disappearances as a crime. That is one Supreme Court verdict. And later also we again went to the court and submitted our compliance and again to criminalize the disappearances in 2014, and the Supreme Court again made a second verdict and directed government of Nepal to criminalize the disappearance and also to criminalize torture, rape as a serious violation. So still this Transitional Justice Act missing those laws. These are important factors that government should amendment, and also these are the reasons that international communities, including United Nations, they are not involving and not cooperating to the commission process. And so ultimately victims are suffering all the way, and commission could not work. International communities and the human rights groups, they are not legitimizing the commission process. Yeah, these are the differences. So also international communities and including United Nations and the Nepal residential coordinator also they are demanding together to the government that if government amends these laws, and so they will cooperate and they will participate in the commission process. So I see the possibilities to also strengthen and advance the commission process through amendment, and also they can create support mechanism financially, technically, and also providing expertise to the commission. This will be beneficial for us and to the victims community. Even without laws, and from the very beginning we said that, and we also mobilized our members to go and register our compliance. That was our first step. We register all the compliance. Already thousands of complaints are there. Now this is the responsibility of the commission, and also we need to strengthen and activate the National Human Rights Commission to deal with these cases after the commission phase. And there is no archiving policy, and also now also during the investigation process there is no protection mechanism for the victims and witness. If you see the context now, the perpetrators are very strong in Nepal context. In the change political scenario also, all the elite perpetrators, they are in senior position of the politics, they are in the parliament, and also many senior officers of the Nepal army are still there in position and powerful, and also in Nepal police, and also in the government. And so that's why also I see that obstacles from security side and political sides. And so they are not interested to deal with the process, and they may challenge during the investigation process, and that may impact to the victims and the witness for their security. So people cannot go and cannot freely speak to the commissions about the truth.
Could you also shed light on the acute and long-term needs of the conflict victims, and how can they be sorted out?
First, the state cannot hide the truth all the time, so they have to disclose the truth. That is important, not for the individual family members. This is collective rights also. So the state and this mechanism, the transitional justice mechanism, they have to very clearly tell to the public and to the society as a nation. And so it's they have to disclose the truth first, and the justice is the government responsibility. They have to follow and implement the rule of law. If they respect the constitution, if they respect the vision of comprehensive peace agreement and the various agreement made by the political parties, they have to implement it. I see the big question of implementation.
You are referring to some cases where security officials, alleged perpetrators, were promoted to higher positions, especially in the security agencies.
Yeah.
That is ultimately again fueling the culture of impunity.
Right.
What are your practical suggestions to the law implementing agencies, including the government, to address this issue so that the concerns of victims are addressed?
Also, I already said that there are some practical obstruction, challenges by the responsible agencies, actors in this whole process. So, I already mentioned about the role of politics. The political parties must implement their commitments, and also they should be responsible. So we are questioning on the accountability of the political parties. They are not accountable, and the security forces, they have to support the process without intervening in the process. For example, during the compliance registration, they have 3 tenders. In some places physically and psychologically, they send letter to the local peace committees, against their compliance. And so especially in the Nepal Army, Nepal Police, the senior officers, they visited to the local peace committees and threatened victims and witness that. So we were registering compliance against us. And so those were the examples. And still today I see the problems that during the investigation process, commission may face the challenges, and victims and witness face the security threats. And so on these things, the government also, I see the bigger role of parliament is watchdog and representatives of the peoples. They have to see and closely monitor the process. There is I see the important role of the social justice and human rights community. Committee of the parliament. They have to also observe the process, and also they have to bring them in track and respect the rule of law and the other issues. And also the role of National Human Rights Commission. They have a monitoring mandate, and they have to closely monitor. And also I see the role of civil society and the victim groups that we have been doing. And so we have been critically monitoring the process. And also international community now, I see them as they are silent now and without position. Also, they have to come up with the position. Also, they are also responsible actors. They have invested a lot during the peace process. Also, they have contributed and invested a lot in the transitional justice process, and also in protection and promoting human rights and democratizations in the country.
Don't you think that the civil society, members of the civil society, they are divided into different political lines, and the agenda of the families of the victims' families is worsening. Civil society role is sought mostly during the times of political changes. But it seems like the issues that you are talking a lot on, the role of government. What if the government fails to address? There comes the role of civil society members who have seen in Nepal. How do you observe, in particular, the role of the members of civil societies?
We all the time resisting and building our movement, grassroots movement at the community level, at the district level, and also national level, that we are representing all victims' issues to be addressed. And referring to the civil society in Nepal, it's a very controversial issues, and they are divided, highly polarized, and so that's why they are weak. And in our issues also, I see the very serious flaws in the struggle for human rights. And the human rights community, I would say a very smaller the interest groups limited in Kathmandu. And so those who try to intervene in the process and claim as leaders in the process, I don't see them at that level.
Well, Mr.
Bhandari, they don't have position today.
And there are a lot of issues to discuss, but we are coming to the end of the show. Do you have anything to share to our audience that I have left to ask you very quickly?
Okay. In these issues, mainly the political parties and heavily intervene and manipulate the victims' agenda for their political benefits. And the civil societies and human rights groups, they have also instrumentalized victims' agenda for their benefits, and they created some gaps in between victims and authorities, and civil society and victims, international community and victims. So that that kind of polarization and the level of interest could not serve the victims. So now this is time to review, and we all actors must come together and create a very collective, strong pressure to the government, to amend the laws and to create some support mechanism for the victims that can directly serve the victims. These are the needs, and also we need to focus to address their everyday needs. What they face in our Nepali context. The poorer you are, more you suffer.
Well, Mr. Bhandari, it was
Thank
pleasure
you.
talking to you. Thank you very much for your time.
much.
Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.